My mother looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You are no longer my daughter." Then she closed the door. Not slammed it, just closed it. Quietly. And somehow that quiet click was louder than any scream could have been. I stood there on that porch for almost 10 minutes. I didn't cry right away. I think I was in shock. I kept staring at the door, waiting for it to open again, waiting for her to say, "I'm sorry," or "Come back inside." It didn't happen. If you're watching this, maybe you felt that kind of rejection too. Maybe from a parent, a friend, someone you thought would never turn their back on you. So stay with me, because this story isn't just about being disowned. It's about what happens after. And trust me, you will not see the ending coming. Let me back up a bit so you understand how we got here. My name doesn't matter for this story, but I'll tell you this. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and reputation means everything. My mother was, and still is, one of those women who cared deeply about what other people thought. Not in a shallow way, but in a "this is how I survived life" way. She grew up poor. She grew up judged. And she promised herself that her children would never bring shame to her name. I was her only daughter. I had 2 older brothers, but I was the one she poured her hopes into. She used to say, "You're going to be somebody. You're going to make this family proud." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Growing up, money was always tight. My dad worked construction, and some months were good, some months were brutal. I remember eating rice with soy sauce for dinner more times than I'd like to admit. But my mother never let us feel poor. She'd sew our school uniforms herself, iron them until they looked brand new, and send us off looking presentable even when our stomachs were empty. I loved her for that. I still do, actually. That's the hard part of this story. Loving someone who hurt you doesn't just disappear. By the time I turned 19, I had a full scholarship to study nursing. My mother was so proud. She told everyone in our neighborhood. She'd stop strangers at the market just to say, "My daughter is going to be a nurse." I remember feeling this weight on my shoulders, like I had to be perfect now. Like failure wasn't an option anymore. And for a while, I was doing okay. I studied hard. I worked part-time as a waitress to help with bills. Life wasn't easy, but it made sense. Then everything changed. You might be wondering how something like this happens. How a mother goes from being your biggest supporter to shutting the door in your face. Well, it started with one phone call. One phone call that flipped my entire life upside down. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my only day off from both school and work. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. Something told me to pick up anyway. It was a nurse from the local clinic. She told me I needed to come in for some follow-up tests. I asked why. She said it was regarding some blood work I had done a few weeks earlier, just a routine check for a minor infection. I didn't think much of it at the time. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. I wasn't married. I wasn't even in a serious relationship. It was complicated. And in my family, in my culture, this wasn't just a personal issue. This was a scandal. This was the kind of thing that could destroy everything my mother had worked so hard to build. Her reputation, her pride, her image in front of the whole neighborhood. I didn't tell her right away. I know, that probably wasn't the smartest choice. But I was terrified. I kept imagining her face, the disappointment, the anger. I kept replaying every warning she'd ever given me about ruining my future and bringing shame to the family. For almost 2 months, I carried that secret alone. I went to school with morning sickness hidden behind a fake smile. I worked my shifts at the restaurant, forcing myself not to cry in the bathroom during breaks. I felt so alone. Genuinely, one of the loneliest periods of my entire life. Eventually, though, secrets like that don't stay hidden. My body started changing. My aunt noticed first. She saw me struggling to button my jeans one afternoon and just gave me this long, knowing look. I begged her not to tell my mom. She agreed, but she also told me I couldn't hide it forever. She was right. One evening, my mother called me into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, arms crossed, eyes red like she'd been crying. My aunt must have told her after all. I found out later, she felt guilty, keeping it from her own sister. My mother didn't yell. That's what scared me the most. She just looked at me and asked, very calmly, "Is it true?" I couldn't lie. I nodded. What happened next is something I'll never forget. She stood up, walked over to me, and slapped me across the face. Not out of pure anger, I think, but out of heartbreak, out of fear, out of everything she had built crumbling in front of her. She told me I had destroyed her name. She told me I had ruined my future. She told me I was no longer welcome in her house. I packed a bag that same night with shaking hands. My brothers weren't home, so I couldn't even say goodbye to them properly. I just left a note on the kitchen table and walked out into the dark. I want you to imagine that feeling for a second. Being pregnant, scared, and suddenly homeless, all in the same week. I had nowhere to go. I ended up staying with a friend from work, sleeping on her couch, not knowing what my next step would even look like. This is where things got worse before they got better. Much worse. I lost my scholarship funding because I had to drop some classes to manage my pregnancy symptoms and my new living situation. I lost my waitressing job too because I couldn't keep up with the physical demands as my pregnancy progressed. I was 19 years old, pregnant, jobless, and essentially disowned by the woman who raised me. There were nights I cried myself to sleep on that couch, wondering if I had ruined my entire life. I remember one night specifically, maybe 5 months into my pregnancy, when I sat on the bathroom floor of my friend's apartment and just sobbed. Not pretty crying.
Ugly, gut-wrenching crying.
I kept asking myself, how did I let this happen? How did I lose everything so fast? But here's something I learned during that time, something I want you to really hear. Rock bottom has a strange way of showing you who you really are. I couldn't afford to fall apart forever. I had another life depending on me now. So little by little, I started rebuilding. I found a job at a small pharmacy, something less physically demanding than waitressing. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Alvarez, was incredibly kind to me. She let me work reduced hours as my due date approached, and even helped me find a used crib and some baby clothes through a community donation group. I never thought I'd say this, but sometimes the people who help you most aren't your blood family. Sometimes they're strangers who choose to show you kindness anyway. I gave birth to my son on a rainy Thursday morning. I was alone in that hospital room. No mother holding my hand, no family cheering me on. Just me, a nurse, and my baby's first cry. It was the most beautiful and painful moment of my life, all wrapped into one. I named him Elias. For the next year, life was a constant struggle. I was a young single mother, working part-time, studying part-time online to try to finish my nursing degree eventually, and raising a baby with almost no support system. There were days I didn't know how I'd afford diapers. There were nights Elias would cry for hours, and I'd cry right along with him out of exhaustion and helplessness. I want to pause here for a second because I know some of you watching this might be going through something similar right now. Maybe you're a single parent. Maybe you've been cut off from your family too. I see you. I really do. It's one of the hardest kinds of pain, feeling like you're fighting a battle completely alone. During that first year, I didn't hear a single word from my mother. Not a text. Not a call. My brothers reached out occasionally in secret, sending small amounts of money when they could, but they were terrified of her finding out. She had made it very clear if anyone in the family helped me, they'd be cut off too. I stopped hoping she'd change her mind. I had to. Hope was too painful when it kept getting crushed. Then, when Elias was about 18 months old, something happened that changed everything. I want you to really pay attention here because this is the turning point of the entire story. I had taken Elias to a community health fair, mostly because they were offering free vaccinations and basic checkups, which I desperately needed since I still didn't have proper health insurance. While waiting in line, I ran into an old family friend, someone who had known my mother for over 20 years. Her name was Ms. Ferreira. She looked at me, then at Elias, and her whole face softened. She asked how I was doing, genuinely, not with judgment. I ended up telling her everything, the pregnancy, being disowned, the struggle of the past year and a half. Ms. Ferreira went quiet for a moment. Then she told me something I didn't expect. She said my mother hadn't been doing well since I left, that she barely left the house, that she'd stopped attending her usual social gatherings, the same ones where she used to proudly brag about her children. Ms. Ferreira said my mother's pride had turned into isolation, and her isolation had turned into what looked a lot like depression. Honestly, part of me felt a flicker of guilt hearing that, but another part of me felt anger. Because while she was isolating herself out of pride, I was out here struggling to survive with her grandson. A few weeks after that conversation, something even bigger happened. My father called me. This was rare because he mostly stayed neutral in the whole situation, too afraid to go against my mother's wishes, but too guilty to fully abandon me either. He told me my mother had gotten seriously sick. She'd been having chest pains and had gone to the hospital. The doctors ran several tests and discovered she had a heart condition, something that had likely been developing for years but had gotten worse due to stress. I remember sitting there, phone against my ear, feeling this overwhelming mix of emotions. Fear for her, anger at everything that had happened, and this strange, aching love that never actually went away, no matter how badly she had hurt me. I decided to visit her in the hospital, not because I had forgiven her completely, but because despite everything, she was still my mother, and I couldn't imagine living with the regret if something happened to her, and I never got the chance to see her again. I brought Elias with me. When I walked into that hospital room, my mother looked so small, so fragile. Nothing like the strong, proud woman who had once slapped me and slammed a door in my face. She looked at me, then her eyes moved to Elias, who was almost 2 years old at that point, toddling beside me, holding my hand. She started crying immediately. Not the composed, controlled crying I remembered from before. This was raw. This was real. She reached her hand out toward Elias, and I let him go to her. I watched my mother hold her grandson for the very first time, tears streaming down her face, whispering apologies over and over. But here's the part of the story that really changed everything, the truth that the title of this video is talking about. While she was recovering, my mother finally opened up to me about why she had reacted the way she did. It wasn't just about pride, or reputation, or shame like I always assumed. It went much deeper than that. She told me that when she was 17 years old, back in her home country, she had gotten pregnant too. Before marriage. Before she was ready. And her own mother had disowned her for it, kicking her out of the house with nothing but a small bag of clothes. She had to survive completely alone, in an even harsher environment than I did, with even less support. She eventually lost that baby due to complications from stress, poor nutrition, and lack of proper medical care. She never told anyone this. Not my father, not her sisters, no one. She carried that grief and trauma silently for over 30 years. When she found out I was pregnant, all of that resurfaced. All that pain, all that fear, all that trauma. And instead of processing it in a healthy way, she reacted exactly the way her own mother had reacted to her. She repeated the same cycle of rejection because it was the only response to this kind of situation that she had ever known. I sat there in that hospital room, completely stunned. My whole perception of what happened shifted in an instant. This wasn't really about me disappointing her. This was about decades of unresolved pain that I had unknowingly triggered. She looked at me and said, "I was so afraid of watching you suffer the way I suffered. So afraid you'd lose everything the way I did. And instead of protecting you, I became the same person who hurt me." I cried with her that day, not out of anger anymore, but out of this deep, complicated understanding. Hurt people really do hurt people. It doesn't excuse what she did. It doesn't erase those months of pain and loneliness I went through, but it helped me understand her. And understanding, I learned, is sometimes the first real step toward healing. From that day forward, things slowly began to change between us. It wasn't instant. It wasn't perfect. We still had arguments. We still had moments where old wounds resurfaced and hurt all over again. Healing a relationship like that doesn't happen overnight, no matter what movies make you believe. But my mother started showing up. She helped babysit Elias while I finished my nursing degree online. She apologized, not just once, but repeatedly, in genuine, meaningful ways. She started going to therapy for the first time in her life, something that was almost unthinkable in her generation and culture. 2 years after that hospital visit, I graduated with my nursing degree. My mother was in the audience. She cried through the entire ceremony. Afterward, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and she whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of you." I always was. I just didn't know how to show it. Today, my son Elias is 5 years old. He calls my mother Nana and absolutely adores her. She takes him to the park every weekend. She still has that same fierce love and pride I remember from my childhood, but now it's balanced with something new, humility, and the willingness to admit when she was wrong. I work as a full-time nurse now, ironically, in the same hospital where she was treated for her heart condition. Sometimes I walk past that room where everything changed, and I still get emotional thinking about it. So, why am I sharing this story with you today? Because I think so many of us carry pain from our families without ever understanding where it truly comes from. We assume rejection means we weren't loved enough, when sometimes it actually means the person hurting us is drowning in their own unhealed trauma. That doesn't make the pain okay. You are allowed to feel hurt. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. But if there's ever a chance for understanding, for truth, for healing, I encourage you to stay open to it. Not for their sake, but for yours. Holding on to anger and confusion forever only weighs you down. My mother and I aren't perfect. Our relationship still has scars that will probably never fully disappear. But we're healing. Slowly, imperfectly, honestly. If you've ever been disowned, rejected, or misunderstood by someone you love, I want you to know something. Your worth was never tied to their reaction. You are not defined by the people who couldn't show up for you the way you needed. I'd love to know if this story resonated with you in any way. Have you ever experienced something similar with your own family? Have you ever discovered a painful truth that changed the way you saw someone who hurt you? Drop a comment below and share your story. Sometimes just putting it into words helps more than we realize. And if this video touched you in any way, please consider subscribing. I share real stories like this one because I believe healing starts with knowing you're not alone. Thank you for staying with me through this story. I'll see you in the next one.